Hello Enki Jazz fans and welcome to the latest instalment of the Enki Jazz podcast. Today I am chatting to the fantastic guitarist and composer Rob Luft about his latest album Life is the Dancer out on Edition Records, about lockdown haircuts, about gigging life after lockdown, a whole host of other things besides. If you are not a follower on our Patreon, please consider heading over there and checking out all the content. This week we have some fantastic concerts coming up. Another great guitarist, Stuart McCallum, is doing a solo set on Wednesday for us. And on Friday we have something very special, a duo set from George Crowley and Bridget Baraha. It's going to be fantastic. So please check out everything over there, sit back and enjoy my interview with Rob Luft. Hello Rob Luft and welcome to the Enki Jazz podcast. How are you keeping?
I'm very well, thank you, Kyran. How are you doing?
No, not too bad. I'm currently exceptionally sunburnt, as you can probably see. I don't know if the horrendous line is going to show up today, but I've been building a greenhouse for the last 2 days in the baking heat, so I'm feeling dazed and confused right now. So
yeah, as you can see, I haven't had my hair cut in about 6 months, in the full cliche of the times.
It's great. I'm loving it. I'm loving the real extremes of some people with exceptionally long hair and other people just going sod this and taking the whole lot off.
I've done that before in 2013 when I started academy, and I shaved it all off for a classic first year student dare after having a few beers, and it looked so bad that I will never ever do that again.
I had a similar experience. I did some filming for a TV show last year, something about a time-travelling jazz band. I can't remember what the name of the show is. It's on ITV or something. But we were obviously some jazz band on there, and it was set in the 50s, and we were told everyone's clean-shaven. So I had to shave my beard, and I've had a beard since I was 14, and I've never seen my chin in like 15, 16 years. And I did it, obviously shaved, and then I discovered this second chin that lives underneath my first chin.
Yeah.
That was exceptionally disappointing.
Yeah.
It gets so nicely hidden by just a ball of fuzz, and then all of a sudden you discover there's this, flat. It's absolutely, heartbreaking. But anyway,
that's how hair's designed, to cover the shape of the usually slightly irregular shape of our heads.
Absolutely. So you've been keeping busy and healthy and active during lockdown and all of this, musically stimulated?
I would say yes to all of those questions. I'm trying to stay healthy. Are we talking musically healthy or just healthy, or both?
Everything. Spiritually healthy, fulfilled in life, as much as possible.
Medical records all looking good. Yeah. No, I'm feeling very, very good now, especially as the lockdown is starting to ease. Feels like the light at the end of the tunnel is slowly approaching. And over the last week or two, we're in late May now, and I am almost in June, I guess. We're almost in June, and I am starting to see friends again in local parks. I've got lots of friends in the community who I've been hanging out with over the past week or so, and I think that also living with another musician, my partner is a wonderful singer. We've been playing together and doing live streams over the past three months, so I still think of myself as almost being gig ready and kind of match fit, so to speak, rather than being in kind of enforced retirement.
Yeah, no, fantastic. I'm glad that's all positive.
I mean, it's just completely obliterated the entire musical landscape that we've built up around ourselves over the past how many decades. It seems to have the carpet's just been pulled out underneath us, hasn't it?
Absolutely, and the uncertainty is so horrendous of knowing when things can go back.
Especially, I think, particularly because the UK is such a big union of 4 countries. It's a big population mass, and it's not like a smaller country. It's not like Norway or Switzerland where they can contain it very quickly, and then they've already gone back to gigs. There are gigs already happening in Denmark and Norway in jazz clubs up to 50 people.
Yeah. It's going to be a good while before that's the case here.
Exactly. Like I said, I think it's the big population just is a killer. I don't know. I'm slightly of the opinion that at some point we have to introduce some semblance of normality again, because it's just people are people are desperate. People do need. I mean, it's one thing being alive, but it's another thing
Living.
if living, right? And also having a livelihood. At some point, we've got a livelihood, and well-being does come from being able to work at some point. And people just, I think people are going a bit crazy, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my mother's definitely one who's going stir crazy, and I'm trying to sort of, do a distance visit once a week and bring some shopping and try and keep her sane. But she lives on her own. We only recently got a new house for her at the end of last year, so she's moved to a new area. She doesn't really know people, so I think she feels like massively isolated. And she's a pensioner, so she just likes to get into Manchester and go to some museums and art galleries and have a pootle about and see what events are on or whatever.
Yeah, it's like all my next door neighbours are of the same age. They're all pensioners, and they're so petrified by what they're reading in the paper as well, that some of them haven't left their houses for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
You think that's got to be terrible for their bodies if they're kind of wasting away by themselves, both for their mind and for their body, if they don't go out and have a walk because they're so petrified by the fear that they're going to catch it on the street or whatever,
Yeah. But man, it's a nightmare situation.
At some point we've got to go back to normal. We've got to start playing music with each other. Got to get it back on the tracks at some point and start playing music again.
Well, I think there'll definitely be. I mean, there's obviously going to have to be some sort of grey transition period before everything is just back to normal. But it's sort of easy to see how some of those things can start to take shape, like having a band on a decent sized stage so that they're distanced, having maybe a small audience in but live streaming the gig and monetizing that so it's still a live experience, but with actual musicians in a room playing together rather than, multi-screen, which...
That doesn't work. The multi-screen doesn't work. And to be honest, I don't think that distancing the musicians on a stage works either. I think at some point you just say, look,
on some stages that's just how you set up anyway. If you play a theatre stage, like you set up 2 meters apart anyway. I don't. But obviously the venue has to be able to accommodate.
I mean, 90%.
Smithies,
yeah. 90%. Yeah, 90% of jazz clubs are not going to be able to accommodate distanced musicians, and they're also going to struggle to accommodate distance audiences because they're small.
That's why the live streaming thing has to go hand in hand with it and be monetized, because otherwise clubs can't afford to host gigs, because I definitely don't see a subsidy coming from the government anytime soon for the arts on that scale.
Unfortunately, I think to live stream a gig, you have to employ another person to do the tech and to get that set up and running, and it is a job.
If your audience is 4 times larger online than it is in person, you only have to charge a quarter of the price to still make it financially viable. So if people are paying £2 at home to watch a live stream of a killing band and they can't get out to the gig, I think people might do it. But it's worth trying these things, because the alternative is not gigging until we're told it's safe to do so, which is...
Yeah, I mean, and I don't want to be a massive kind of negative energy, but I've done 10 live streams over the past 2.5 months. I've done 10 for different organizations and also individually as a just as an experiment myself. I've done a couple and I've had varying degrees of success. And what I have realized is that at some point they become a bit of a novelty, or they have become a bit of a novelty, and people have kind of figured it out that it's basically not the same as going to a real gig. Having a tab up on their Google Chrome, and on the other tab they've got like The Guardian up, and then on the other tab of their Google Chrome they've got like YouTube up. It's like they've realized that it's become a commodity or something.
Yeah, I think there's been a few things at play there, which was like immediately, obviously a lot of people putting a huge amount of content up for free, which immediately dilutes the market and means that it's very hard for anyone to make a monetized thing out of it. And B, obviously, because we can't get together with other musicians in the same way. It's a lot of people on their own, or just with, you know, one other person they live with or whatever, you know, and it just becomes like the diversity becomes really limited, you know, because you're just caught with those people. But once you get to that interim stage where, say, like, you know, in a few weeks' time or a couple of months' time, I could easily imagine you being able to get your full quintet together in a room and do an actual performance with maybe some limited live audience, but then people are actually tuning into an actual gig rather than, you know, whatever you can do in your bedroom at home, you know. But this is where I think venues need to be the facilitators, just like they are normally. Like, you can't host a gig in your own house, you know. You can't have people come to watch in your own home, you know. And so exactly. You know, I see our role in this as being able to employ musicians still, you know. We've been running this whole like lockdown program, and, you know, we've been trying to just keep money moving around the scene and paying musicians for actually being musicians, or like yourself now, in place of the gig, just having at least a bit of a chat, but at least some money is still moving, and, you know, and I do think that there is going to have to be some sort of interim, and we just have to try and it's not going to be the same as just having 100 people in a room watching a gig, but if that's not possible, we have to try and make the next best thing happen.
Absolutely, for now. And like I say, I think in other countries it will return to normal
more quickly
sooner. And as you know, I'm lucky enough to be here with Elina, who's obviously a Swiss citizen, and we play a lot in Switzerland, and I play a lot in places like, you know, Norway and these smaller countries, Belgium, where I think gigs will start to go back to normal considerably quicker.
Britain is in for a really rough ride, isn't it? With obviously the economic backlash of all of this, then the economic downturn of Brexit, and then just the fact that of climate change,
and just the fact that the music scene was already in tatters. It's so oversaturated here in London. So many musicians. I think it's really not it's not going to be a kind of golden age for, you know, kind of, it's not like Norway, which is in the middle of like a kind of Renaissance period at the moment. It's like they're having their enlightenment. You know, you've got so many great musicians and great artists in Norway who just seem to be able to disseminate their music and their arts just with fantastic support and backing from local organizations and government organizations. We are just not in that position at the moment.
I think it's so much of the rest of Europe is doing it at least much better than we are. You know, Germany, Switzerland obviously really supports, you know, musicians, and
absolutely.
Because I always think of Germany as being a great place, and then you chat to German friends and they all go, "Oh no, to make our money we go and gig in Switzerland."
You know what? When you go on like YouTube and you look at like great gig footage of like past jazz concerts, have you ever, and I say ever, seen any of them come out of the UK? I think you'll be able to answer that as a probable no, and that they're probably all coming from like Mezzo in France, or from Arte in France, or from the Norwegian. All these great, or the BIM House in Amsterdam, all these great videos of jazz concerts all come from Europe.
I mean, it's really hard to even find them from the States. You know, there's like low quality, you know, sort of bootleggy smalls gigs where everyone's playing incredibly, but the quality of the audio and the videos obviously like, you know, pretty
appalling. I mean, you know, there's a reason that Norman Granz, who was the head of Verve Records, when someone asked him about the state of jazz, and this was like back in the 60s, his answer was no Europe, no jazz. Because and I think that still rings true in 2020. No Europe, no jazz. They just treat jazz musicians and treat jazz as a proper art form, and I don't include Britain in that sentence, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, I suppose it, you know, sadly there is a sort of an idealistic divide, isn't there? There is a difference in what the UK people in general prioritise as important in life compared to the majority of Europe. And so Brexit sort of makes sense in, you know, that standpoint, but it's obviously heartbreaking to be, you know, I think almost anyone in the art scene by definition has to resonate more strongly with the the European aesthetic.
Yeah, I mean, totally, and especially the way they treat you when you're out there.
Yeah.
It's incomparable. And this whole scenario has made it clear to me when I go on YouTube and try to look for like past Keith Jarrett concerts, past whoever concerts. It's always on on a stage in Europe that you find those great jazz videos and great jazz documentaries coming from.
Yeah, with well-attended audiences and, you know, beautiful concert halls rather than, you know, small clubs half empty with people talking over.
Yeah, and beautifully filmed, you know, beautifully filmed and beautifully recorded. They've been taking it seriously for years, and that rings true to the first video that we've selected, which is the video that I did with Tom and Corrie and Elina, which was filmed in February by Moods. They've got a professional AV team there in the club who already, since 3 years, have been doing live streaming their concerts at the same time as the live performance in high definition. They've been doing that for years.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's it. And it's the difficulty, obviously, in the UK with doing it is trying to get the financial resources to get there to achieve that, you know. And obviously, the Arts Council does what it can, you know.
It's very good.
And obviously, you know, jazz is not necessarily one of their big spenders, but, you know, they still make an awful lot happen. And, you know, the people involved in the Arts Council on the jazz side of things are, you know, passionately fighting for all the right things and all of that.
Yeah, they're very, very good people, and they're very much doing the best they can. It's just that there aren't.
They don't have the budget.
Yeah, they don't have the budget due to the size of the scene, the size of the industry. It's a massive.
Sure, but I mean, Germany's got a bigger population than we have. They've got, you know, as many artists, and they just fund it a lot more. You know, obviously somewhere like Norway is different in that regard, but.
Yeah, I think also perhaps London doesn't necessarily help in the sense that it is probably considered one of the global capitals of music. So you get people coming, young musicians and musicians of all ages actually, coming from all over the world to find themselves in London, so to speak, and to try and work and to, for lack of a better phrase, kind of make themselves forge a career for themselves in London as a musician, because it's seen so much as being one of the global capitals of music that doesn't necessarily help, and that probably pushes the bar down, and it further oversaturates the scene, which is tough.
And that's the exact same thing of New York, you know, where there isn't, you know, massive state. I mean, New York's even worse for not having, you know, any kind of state funding for the arts going on. It's even harder to scrape it together there. But just that mass saturation of people, whereas, you know, places like Cologne, obviously, it's got a really thriving scene of musicians, but it's so much smaller and doesn't have that thing of people flocking there, and it's funded and supported. So if you live there, you've just got like this tranquil life of just making music in a really relaxed and holistic way, you know? Of
course we're probably slightly romanticizing the notion of this, and the people who are there in Cologne or in Oslo will say, hang on a minute guys, it's not all, you know, it's not, the pavements are not literally lined with gold.
Yeah, of course.
But from where we're standing, it's definitely a case of
they're not lava.
Exactly, the grass is definitely greener on that side of the fence, it would seem. But and I would probably vouch for that, having been a little bit in Switzerland and playing in Switzerland with my partner over the last 2 years. I can vouch for it being slightly more relaxed in terms of pace of life, and in terms of conditions for concerts, definitely feeling slightly more valued there than I would.
Pace of life is a big one, I think. You know, myself and Emily do some work in the Faroe Islands, which is, you know, obviously the very end of the spectrum of, you know, it's only a population of 50,000 people or so. It's part of Denmark, but, you know, sitting between Iceland and Norway.
Yeah.
And just everything is so relaxed, but their arts are like incredibly well funded. They have ridiculous facilities, amazing festival lineups and all of this, but just everyone just has so much time in life, always, you know, and you just think it does constantly feel like a rat race in the UK, because there's, like you say, so many people and so many very active people in
so
your
many
face.
talented people. It's so much talent. It's just terrifying. Everywhere you look, you see so many great musicians of all different generations. There are still musicians here who are kind of in their 80s. You look at someone like Art Thiemann, he's still playing incredibly well. I did a concert with him last year, and I was just like, he told me his age just before the gig, and I was totally shell shocked. And then he played so well.
Yeah. And
He's
isn't
still
it
playing
Art
so
Thiemann
well.
who's also he trained as a medical doctor?
He's a retired doctor, yes.
Yeah.
A retired surgeon, I think.
Outrageous.
And he plays so beautifully even now, and he's still active as a touring jazz musician, and that's probably maybe at the upper end of the generations active here in the UK. But there are musicians right down to the age of 15 and 16 who are also playing incredibly, and they're also starting to tour now. So there's such a wide variety of scenes. It's not just this London-centric thing at all that I'm talking about. I just talk about that because I'm living in London. But obviously there's a big Manchester contingent. There's a big Birmingham contingent. There's a big Scottish jazz scene now.
Yeah, massive. Yeah.
And so when you combine all of these different facets, it's kind of understandable that maybe there isn't enough demand to satisfy the supply of great talent here.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to backtrack wildly. So we first met. I think it would have been around 2011 or so on a few Nijo gigs that I was depping on.
For about 10 years ago, I'd say we probably known each other.
Yeah. So you were you even doing your A levels yet at that point? Maybe just
GCSE maths.
Whew, yeah,
yeah, man.
So I remember. I got there and, sitting next to Nadeem on tenor, who's obviously, ferocious musician. And, and I would say almost everyone else there at the time was a music student, at a conservatoire or, possibly a few uni students, whatever, but they were all of that age. And then you were noticeably maybe like 3-4 years younger than the majority, maybe even a bit more than that, and you were just playing absolutely ferociously, and and also playing at every available moment. I remember yourself, you were just in every spare moment, just having a bit of a shed or playing some duo standards or whatever.
Yeah, I feel like I lived my quarantine was actually when I was around 14 or 13 years old, and I locked myself in my bedroom at the time and just was totally immersed in practice for probably 3 or 4 years, where I just really didn't take secondary school as seriously as I should have done and practiced too much,
Well, I mean, because I was going to ask about that, because unlike maybe a lot of people who've gone on to do a lot of great things, and especially living around London, you didn't do junior academy, did you?
No, I didn't.
And you were in Nijo, so you had that going on sort of late teens or mid late teens, but you went to a school that does have a music specialism, but isn't it's not Cheatham's or Purcell, it's not a music school. So where did the love of jazz come from, and your decision that this is what I need to do, this is what I want to do, and was it a largely self-led project getting all of that together?
Yeah, I mean, I was really lucky that when I was in just around the age of probably 10, my stepfather moved in to my mum's house that I was growing up in, and he brought with him an amazing record collection and a love of jazz. And so he had like great vinyl that he brought, whether it was Mahavishnu Orchestra or whether it was Coltrane's My Favorite Things or whether it was Bitches Brew, Mingus Blues and Roots. It was like a pretty amazing moment for me. And this was just at the point before things like Spotify and YouTube really kicked off. So I was literally digging into his bag of vinyl and pulling out whatever I can find and putting it on the turntable and listening to McLaughlin, Birds of Fire, or like I say, Miles, Jack Johnson, Miles in a Silent Way, all those albums that he had on vinyl. And it was just, that was a pretty amazing moment for me, and also a moment at which I'll never forget. I'll always carry that with me. And like you say, it probably was more of a self-led
Mm.
kind of endeavor and just a love. Also, it was very anti everything of the time. You know, all of my peers thought I was some kind of nutcase, you know, obsessing over John Coltrane and Charlie Parker at the age of like 13 or 14. But I just saw something that I really connected with and really touched me. And it also led me to be inside myself. And I wasn't very, you know, I'm not saying that I was the most unpopular kid in the school, but I wasn't Mr. You know, I wasn't the coolest guy in the class. And I just found this connection with jazz that really helped me in my teenage years. Yeah.
Amazing. My first experience of, you know, really getting to grips with jazz albums, I'd been playing the saxophone for years, but, you know, not in any sort of serious way, just, you know, lessons at school and whatever. And then I'd stopped having lessons, wasn't really doing anything at home with it. It was just sitting there. My mum decided, you know, I need something to kickstart Kyran getting excited about this, and she went into a shop and bought a Coltrane and a Parker album. And my mum doesn't really know much about jazz, but she knew that they were names of good sax players. So well done, mother.
Exactly, yeah.
And she brought them home, and I remember putting the Coltrane album on, and it was like a live 1965 concert, and it was just like, I just thought, this is like the most horrendous noise I've ever heard in my life. And
Yeah.
Stop it straight away. But then the Parker finally got in, and then, you know, took another year or two for me to go, wow, this Coltrane is, you know, this is where it's at, you know.
I think I was very lucky in that sense to have access to My Favorite Things, which is such an it's a universally known melody. We've all heard that melody from the musical since we were yay high, and as a result, hearing a jazz interpretation of it and hearing Coltrane's quartet interpreting it with Elvin and McCoy, and they just vamp and vamp and vamp on that record, you know. So it's pretty accessible to me. I could really connect that with. Prior to that, I'd been listening to like rock music or of the day, you know, whether it was like bands like Nirvana and Radiohead and stuff like that. I really liked those bands, but I started to see a connection between their music and this version of My Favorite Things, which just it was like a gateway drug almost, you know. Just hearing that modal vamp, hearing the Coltrane solo over the top. I don't know if you've ever listened back to Nirvana in the last few years, but Kurt Cobain's guitar solos are basically free jazz. They sound like Ornette Coleman or something, you know.
Yeah.
He's totally, I don't think he had any awareness of how cool what he was playing was, or maybe I don't know if he was even aware of what notes he was playing, but the energy behind the solos, they have something like Ornette or Don Cherry, you know, he's playing over like Dave Grohl playing a backbeat, and in the middle of this, you know, in the middle of Come As You Are, there's this mad guitar solo, and no one really remembers that about Nirvana, but I sort of heard this connection between that and Coltrane, you know, with his kind of sheets of sound soprano on My Favorite Things. It was like, which goes totally out at some points, and I heard this weird connection between those two things, and somehow in my head that made sense. And
that's brilliant. I'm definitely going to listen back to my old Nirvana CDs with a fresh ear.
With the guitar solos, they are totally wild.
Awesome. that first Coltrane album that my mum got was like, you know, a 35-minute long version of Impressions was the first track.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah. All those bootleg Coltrane, they're totally mad, and he's you can hear by that time he's just the amount of, because like you say, it's a lot of it's modal. He's playing over Impressions or over India or the Inchworm or My Favorite Things. It's very modal, and he's at that stage in his career where he's kind of sounds like he's cycling through all of the previous harmonic information that he's worked on over all of his other tunes, but he's superimposing it over a lot of those modal tunes that he played at the end of his career. And if you don't listen first to the beginning of his career and you just jump in at 65 or A Love Supreme, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And also just the flip side of that, just the power of the raw expression of just, you know, making what if you just took it in isolation would be almost the most horrendous sound on the instrument, but delivered at the right time in the right way for that to be such a powerful emotional statement. That was so hard to plug into at 14, just this assault of noise from the entire band as well, you know.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like you're saying, there's so much history there with Elvin and with McCoy, who were obviously the first members of his classic quartet before Jimmy Garrison joined on the bass. I mean, the shared playing history between those guys, and they just knew exactly what buttons to press to stoke the fires.
Yeah.
And if I know as myself, I was there, I got a Love Supreme a bit too young, and then I came back to it just like a year ago, and I just was so obsessed with it when they released that that previously unreleased Coltrane album.
Yeah.
What was it called?
I can't remember what they called it, but yeah,
they called it was it Both Directions at Once, perhaps?
I can't remember.
But that I listened to that and A Love Supreme at this a kind of similar period around a year ago when the record came out, and I was just hearing so many parallels between Both Directions at Once, and then you can hear that shifts into A Love Supreme, and there's so much stuff he was working on at the time of Both Directions at Once, which I think was recorded 63, 64, and then that goes into Love Supreme, which was also 64 or 65.
Love Supreme's a bit earlier, I think, isn't it?
Is it?
I think it's surprisingly early 60s.
Okay, right. So it's probably around the same time he recorded that Both Directions at Once. In that case, so you can hear there's really so much of the same kind of thematic material that he's working with on the instrument, and even some of the melodies of the tunes have shared kind of information with some of the melodies on A Love Supreme, like Resolution, that really famous track on the second track on A Love Supreme. That there's some of the melodic information on that is shared with that first track, the Untitled Blues on the Both Directions at Once album. There's like a bit of that melody comes from the melody of Resolution, so you can hear he's a bit like a classical, kind of like Beethoven or something. You have to work through his whole catalogue to make sense of it.
Yeah, well, amazing. Yeah, you've inspired me. I need to go back and chronologically listen to all of Coltrane during lockdown. That would be the best possible use of time. Amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So to jump wildly from what we're talking about, obviously after Nigel and all of that, you studied at Academy. And the first thing I want to chat to you about is one of your early co-led album releases was with the Deco Ensemble, doing a load of Tango Nuevo stuff. And you just brought out the second album with them last year, is that correct?
Yeah, we did. It was recorded several years ago. It was recorded in 2016, 2017.
Oh, so quite soon after the first release.
But we were fishing around for someone to release it for a few years.
Okay. Yeah. So for those listening who haven't checked out Deco Ensemble, it's a very different string of your bow on there to what people might be used to hearing you playing.
Yeah.
And basically, where did because obviously your own writing is very influenced by a whole spread of different world music cultures that we can get into a little bit later. But what was the seed for this tango project that's obviously been a long lasting thing? Yeah,
I mean, I still listen to the music of Piazzolla, like every week. I just always put on that. There's a classic album that he did with his own quintet called Tango Zero, Tango 0 Hour, and it's like the only studio album he made with his own quintet. And the reason I got involved in that music is because he was one of the first classical composers to start to use the electric guitar. And when I was back in my academy days, there's a great accordion department at the Academy of classical accordionists, and a lot of them are interested in how they can be, I guess, be versatile and play lots of different styles. A lot of the accordion players in the department at the Academy I found were really open-minded, and one of them asked me if I wanted to get involved because there was this electric guitar opening with this connection to classical music. And Piazzolla himself notates all his guitar parts, but leaves some space open for improvisation because his own guitarist in his quintet was a jazz guitarist. So
All right.
it was my way into that world. And also, I mean, he was a student of Nadia Boulanger, and he was one of the great composers of the 20th century. And the melodies are so sophisticated, and the compositions are so elegant. I just think that it was an amazing learning experience for me to be involved in that group. We're not very active anymore. I mean, we don't do very many concerts anymore. We only do a couple of 3 or 4 concerts a year because there's not a huge market for tango nuevo music in the UK. Obviously, it's not a dance music, and it's not pure classical music. So it sits in between two worlds. You know, traditional golden age tango. You know, the kind of the great composers of the 20s and 30s of Argentinian tango music. That's all designed to be danced to for social dance class, for milonga and that kind of classic tango dancing. Whereas Piazzolla's music is not meant to be danced to. It's meant to be listened to almost like jazz music or like modern classical music.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I always when I started doing classical saxophone, and there's some great arrangements of Piazzolla for saxophone. I always found it funny that tango, you know, well, the spirit of tango is encapsulated by the fact that the dancing nature of it was born out of, it was originally music to play outside of the bordellos for the performers to dance to entice the punters in, and it's definitely got that spirit of fire within it.
Yeah, and it comes from that. It's a bit like jazz in the sense that it's fused from the song clave and the rhythms that came over from the West African from slave trade, I think, and those rhythms of West Africa, of the Congo, and of the West African, the music of West Africa was brought over on the slave ships, and I mean, obviously, that's a tragic story, but the arrival of that musical culture in Argentina is what led to tango being born. It was born out of the son clave, combining with European classical harmonies, with Spanish composers, and with Portuguese classical composition and harmony, and it fused and created those two things fused together. And like you say, it was very much a music of the street at its inception, like jazz was. It was a folk music. It was a fusion of lots of different stuff that came together in this melting pot that Buenos Aires was about 100 years ago. And it's an incredible music, and it's really worth studying for anyone with any interest in jazz. And I think tango is an equally rich genre.
Beautiful. Dipping in and listening to some of the Deco Ensemble first album earlier on, it did remind me a lot when you came to play with us last year with Alice doing the duo set. There was a lot of dipping into some South American sort of sound worlds for that, and it brought back a lot of happy memories. That was a lovely gig.
Yeah, that's true, actually.
For anyone, obviously the majority of people watching won't have been able to come because it was a very small gig, that one. It was a whiskey tasting. Whiskey
very niche.
tasting. Yeah. But I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed the whiskey, and I really enjoyed the music. So it was.
Unfortunately, I don't drink and play, so I was unable to sample the whiskey. But I can only imagine.
The smell was wonderful.
Exactly.
But and you've been a fairly consistent and regular face at our nights in Manchester over the last years. I was trying to work out what your first gig was up with us, whether it was with Corrie Dick or whether it was with Big Bad Wolf, because they both played.
Dick.
It was Corrie, yeah. And
Corrie at the. Where was that? At the Wonder Inn.
The Wonder Inn, yeah. That was a phenomenal gig. Everyone was absolutely playing a blinder that day.
That was a brilliant tour, and that was a brilliant vibe upstairs at the Wonder Inn. I remember that.
Yeah, I remember George Crowley had sprained his ankle the night before jumping off a castle wall somewhere or something. So
Jumping off Barnard Castle.
Exactly. And I just remember he had rather than sitting down, he just limped on one leg for the entire gig, and still absolutely burnt. You know,
I think I was responsible for him damaging his ankle, so I don't want to go into too much detail.
We'll leave that one where it is then.
Yeah. There's discretion, you know, kind of a clause that we signed at the end of that evening that I would never talk about it.
Okay, we'll draw a line under that. You visited with Big Bad Wolf a few times, and then it would have been tomorrow, as we're recording this, would have been your first visit with your own project. Well, your solely led project, being the quintet.
Yes.
So we're absolutely heartbroken that's not able to happen, but obviously we're looking forward to making that happen when it can.
Absolutely, we'll be back when we eventually do our scheduled UK tour, which was going to be now. But we'll be back.
Exactly. And so I'd like to dip into the first track that you've picked out for us to play, before we chat a bit further about the quintet and all of that. You've picked out a track that uses the same rhythm section that you have in the quintet, but this is with your partner Elina.
Yes.
Just a little bit about this, please.
So this is actually the last gig I did before the lockdown with Tom McCreadie, the bass player, and Corrie, the drummer in my quintet, who are two of my closest musical compadres, and we have very fond memories of this. We did a 3-night residency at Moods Jazz Club in Zurich back in early February, around the time of Storm Dennis or Storm Chiara or one of those crazy storms. And I just remember flying into Zurich on this plane that was kind of like a leaf in the wind as it landed in the Alpine, the airport in the Alps in Zurich. So that was a slightly hairy memory. And I thought this year is obviously starting up. It started off with all those storms, and I thought, wow, this is a very that was a very dramatic moment. I thought surely this will be the peak of the drama that I'd see this year. And then 1 month later, this whole situation kicked off. Yeah. Anyway, the track is by it's an Albanian folk song. Elina is Albanian and half Albanian, half Swiss, and she is kind of well known for combining Albanian folk songs with a more jazz aesthetic. So I've arranged this piece called Mora Testin, which is a love song, and it is a very simple folk piece from Albania that we have kind of reimagined in this kind of proggy, psychedelic kind of rock, kind of David Gilmour sort of mood. And it's been filmed by the guys in Zurich, and that's it.
Fantastic. Enjoy. Fantastic. That was Maura Testin with Rob and Elina and Tom and Corrie. Beautiful. Wanted to ask you a bit more then. The quintet, you won the Kenny Wheeler Prize. Congratulations, belatedly, at the end of your time at Academy. And I presume at that stage, did you already have the quintet together? And was the plan initially with that prize to go and write and record an album with this quintet? Or was the quintet something that followed on afterwards from your studies and the people you met there, of course? And how did that all come to be? Why those people?
Tom and Corrie were always the core of the band. I guess it was all about having more opportunity to play my music with those two guys who are so integral to my development. I've been playing with them for about 10 years as well. I was introduced to both of them by Nadim Tamori, who we spoke about earlier. He introduced me to them when I was still at school, and I loved their playing back then. And I've always loved how they approach people's original music. I think they're such wonderful team players, and they always serve the music. And I'd been playing with them since my second year at college, and I just wanted to have the opportunity to play more with them. So I had this trio with them, and then Joe Wright got roped in, and he's such an amazing saxophone player that at the time I did my recital for the final recital when I was graduating from the academy, I didn't have any keyboard player or piano player in the band because Joe Wright was able to kind of comp for me just on saxophone. He's so great with extended techniques and with multiphonics and with breathing sounds that he could create textures that felt like a piano comping somehow, which was amazing without using any processing on the horn or anything. It was all done acoustically. It was amazing. And then when it came to record the debut album, I guess again Joe Webb had been a musician that I have loved his playing for years and had known about him back when he was at the Welsh College, and when he moved to London he started playing with Corrie. And on that tour that we also mentioned where we played at the Wander Inn, that was when I really got together with Joe and had a great hookup with him where we were really complementing each other's playing because it's not always particularly easy to get a guitar and piano hookup to be totally aligned like that. And we just had such a great time playing together that I just thought his kind of approach would be perfect to complement the sound of Corrie, Tom McCreadie and Joe Wright playing my music. So we recorded as a quintet and we did a tour in the following year in 2018, and we did about 15 gigs last year as well, and we had quite a nice tour lined up for this year. I think 15, 20 more shows, of which, of course, the Whiskey Jar would have been one. And unfortunately, that's fallen by the wayside. But we'll be back next year, or whenever whenever we can, we'll be back. But I love playing with those guys, and I love how they just serve the music really well. It's not. There's nothing much more than you can ask than that. I think in accompanists and in band members, side players, side men and side women. They're just the thing of serving the music is so strong with those guys. And
so the first album, Riser, obviously has done fantastically well, and it's a beautiful album. If anyone hasn't already checked that out, follow the link down at the bottom. You'll be in for a treat. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the progression from first album to the notoriously difficult second album,
made even more difficult by the coronavirus.
Yeah, absolutely. So your first album, Riser. If you listen, you hear an awful lot of West African influence, some, especially I think with Corrie on drums, the North African sort of sound as well, and some folk, and all of this mixed in with heavy jazz underlying aesthetic and all of this. With the new album, while it's still underpinned by those things, because I think they're an integral part of your sound as a musician anyway, it definitely feels like, for me anyway, you may be able to disagree and put me straight, but there's also a bit more of a sensibility of even some almost like singer-songwriter type aesthetic in there, which I wonder if that's born out of a lot of the duo work you've been doing, obviously with Elina, but with Alice Savadsky as well, and others, and also a bit of a tinge of like trance electronica and some more proggy moments as well.
Yeah.
And how has that come about? And even at points it felt to me, I can't remember, is it Synesthesia, there's a bit of an almost like Balkan, Eastern European, maybe this is a bit of Albanian nuance seeping in as well. But yeah, so how was the move compositionally moved from the first album to the second album? What were you attempting to do differently, to do the same?
I was attempting to consolidate the sound of the first album, which is very much, like you say, a blend of my influences and trying to keep that jazz aesthetic very much at the forefront, and also to have the guitar as the defining quality of the group sound, without it just being like a kind of Guitar-mageddon kind of experience where the guitar is just all about the guitar. I didn't want it to be a kind of guitar band. I want it to be music.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I didn't consciously think about any of these factors, but now reading reviews and listening back to the album with everyone's feedback coming through after it being out for a month now, it's very interesting how I'm now ascribing a lot of these qualities to it that I definitely didn't think about when I wrote it, recorded and conceived it. Like you say, there is definitely a touch of electronica influence in there. I love the music of people like, I love 70s Brian Eno. I love kind of minimalism, the kind of musicians like Taylor Dupre or sound artists, Japanese sound artists, people who are quite niche. And I've been lucky enough to be touring with Arve Henriksen, the Norwegian trumpet player, a bit over the last year or so, and he's obviously a master of sound. He's of that generation of people like Nils Petter Molvær and Eivind Arset and Jan Bang, and those sound artists that have come out of Scandinavia. And I love that minimalism and that just feel of slow moving, reflective, textural music that you can just put on and just let it wash over you. And if you want to delve into the detail, it's there, but you don't necessarily have to feel obliged to think, with a lot of modern jazz, I feel like it can become very, very intellectual and very much for the musician at some point, and losing that feeling of just stick the record on and let it just wash over you. And I love that quality in music, that you can meditate to it, that you can have it as your running soundtrack, that you can put it on a plane, that you can put it on the car stereo, and it sounds good and it makes sense in all those contexts, as well as studying it. And if you want to transcribe the solos, if you want to transcribe the compositions and work out what harmonic devices I'm using, you can still do that. That is one thing I've always tried to write music in that way. And obviously the singer-songwriter thing, I'm I've always been heavily influenced by Nick Drake, John Martin, Johnny Greenwood, people, all the Radiohead musicians, Tom York's solo work, all of that is a definite influence in my music. British rock, like you say, the trance thing with Pink Floyd, and that's a big influence. And I think that kind of combines, and it's it has made for a different sounding record than Riser. I don't know why. I honestly don't know why it's different. People definitely say to me, "Oh, it sounds different." And to me, I was actually trying to do the same thing again. I've really failed at that objective of.
Well, I think it's always hard to monitor your own growth as a person in any regard, and as a musician, obviously, as being part of that. And I'm sure it's just that you're several years along the line from where you were writing the material for the first album, and you've just life has thrown other things at you. But it's
I don't know if it's better or worse or it's the same. I was trying to just consolidate the sound, and to create another kind of, like, thinking of an album like a set. That Riser was the first set, then we had a break, and then we played the second set. I thought that this new album was like the second set or something to that, because maybe my next album, I don't want to do a quintet album, maybe I want to do a trio album or whatever my next album's could be. I don't know yet, but I was thinking about it like that, as being as a second set to the Riser's first set with the quintet.
Yeah, well, I definitely think you've achieved that. When I'm obviously highlighting the differences, but like I say, it is underpinned by the same aesthetic as the first album, definitely. And there's a strong compositional voice that runs between the two. So don't stress that you've created two vast. It's not 90s miles and 50s miles.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I was just picking up on the fact that a lot of people have they search for the differences and the new things they find in the music, which is really interesting. What people's expectations are when they come to listen to your second record.
Well, this is it. If Jazzwise ran an article, Rob Luft makes first album again with slightly different tracks, it's not exactly. Yeah. That's not the big sell, is it? It's what's the new thing? But
exactly.
So with all that in mind, why don't we take a listen to the quintet? You've picked out a track for us from the first album.
Yes.
Called Beware. This is a studio shoot rather than a gig. Is that right? By the looks.
It is actually. This was an unused extra take of Beware that we did on the recording session of the first album.
Ah, beautiful.
And we did it in quartet without keys, and this, again, you hear Joe Wright really at the forefront with his textural capabilities here. And it was going to be maybe included as a bonus track on the first record, but it was filmed really beautifully by a friend of mine from Surrey who was present at the session, and he filmed it, set up the lights on the last day. We had a bit of time to spare. We thought, let's make a little bonus track or whatever. Obviously, that never got used, but I'm very glad that now we can show this video of Beware.
Beautiful. Enjoy. Wonderful. That was Beware. What is coming up in the future for you now, Rob? Obviously, I know uncertainty lies ahead. Second album is done now. You've done that. You said obviously as of yet you don't know what the third album could be. What new projects are brewing, and what would you like to be able to do once things start returning back to normal?
I think we can expect a recording from myself and Elina at some point in the next 12 months. I will say nothing more about that at the moment because I don't know anything at all and I couldn't possibly speculate. By which I mean we may have recorded some music that will be released by a record label you may have heard of in the next 6 months or so, but I will say nothing more on that. Yeah, exactly. I'm going to just leave the elliptical nature of that.
The three dots.
Exactly. Yeah. So you can expect something from us by the end of the year. Very excited about that. Slightly less excited than I was before Corona because again we were going to have some huge, amazing tour. World domination was awaiting us. Of course, we can't dominate the world in the way that we had planned to, but we'll still do our best to conquer the world, maybe digitally with the new album or with hopefully with some European dates starting in September. I'm planning to hopefully start touring again in the autumn with concerts booked that don't look like they're going to be cancelled in, like I said earlier, some of these smaller nations like Belgium and Norway, Sweden and Switzerland, and hopefully they will stay in the book because things seem to be going pretty well over there. And for the summer, that means that I've just got to enjoy the sun really at this point. And hopefully with the borders restrictions starting to ease in some European nations, I've already got my eye on the flights out of London literally in the next 10 days. Yeah, so sunglasses and flip-flops are at the ready.
Just remember to wear sun cream.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm quite pale, but I've already been tanning a bit in the park this week. It's been unseasonably warm here in London, and I've been, I've been sunning myself all week. But I think, I think it's getting up to kind of 35 degrees already in like the south of Italy, and which is my idea of paradise. I'm solar powered. I'm solar powered. So
I lived in South Africa for a year, and
wow,
some days there it got over 40, and I was on death's door every day for like weeks on end. I'm not cut out for that.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, you can't go outside in between the hours of 11 a.m. and like 6:30 p.m. Can you? You just can't go outside.
It's like when you breathe in and it feels like the air is a solid substance going into your body. It's just, or you get out of the shower, you dry yourself off, and you just need to get straight back in the shower again.
Yeah. Well, there is. I got used to it because I spent a lot of time in the south of Europe last summer doing some touring with Elina. We were in Albania, Kosovo, in Macedonia. After a few days, we were doing like 10-hour van journeys from one gig to the next on a tour, and in that weather, we were literally driving along like roads with the those sliding van doors. We had the sliding van door open on the motorway just to stay cool. Getting to that kind of condition. But I think at this point I'm ready for that. My pre-existing plans for 2020 involving performing live music have all fallen by the wayside, and at this point that just seems like the only way to do it. Just get in the sun, go for a swim in the sea,
Brilliant. Well, wish you all the best with that for sure. So, what are your top tips for lockdown then for all the listeners? What would you recommend as a positive thing that people could be doing with their time right now?
Obviously, listening to my new album. That's probably the most positive thing you can do to affect my life. If you want to make a positive effect on my life, if you want to make a positive effect on your own lives, how would I don't know. I think just enjoy the fact that the heavy lockdown is over. It's time to reconnect with friends, time to reconnect with family, whether that's in private gardens or in the local park. It's all up for grabs at this point. So I think just human contact is just incredibly euphoric. I've realized that I'm enjoying our chat on Zoom, but if we were here together in my studio chatting away, it would be a whole different experience, and it would be so much more enlightening and rewarding. And I think the thing of being in a room with other human beings is just so, or in a park or in a garden, sorry, to abide by the
exactly. Safety first, but human contact, human connection.
Absolutely. We're musicians. Everything we do is about the contact and the interaction of humans. And it is a truly spiritual and uplifting experience to share music and to share communication and to share words and to share conversations and food and good wine or whatever it is with other human beings. It's just incomparable. And I think that now that we can legally do that, we should all embrace that and do it as much as we can, because ultimately as musicians, that's what it's all about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Connection. Beautiful. Well, listen, Rob, thank you so much for taking the time out to join us, and we'll see you back in Manchester as soon as we can, of course. And everyone go and check out the new album. It's beautiful.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
See you later, Rob. Take care. Hello again, Enki Jazz fans. Thanks so much for taking the time to tune in today and listen to my interview with the fantastic Rob Luft. Big thanks to Rob for his time. Please go and check out his latest album, Life is the Dancer, on Edition Records. Please head over to our Patreon, patreon.com/NQJazz, to check out all of our concerts, the rest of our podcasts, our film series, and much more besides. Thanks so much. We hope to see you again next time. Bye-bye.